Our first speaker is Toine Timmermans. Toine is a global leader in food waste management and is active globally in food waste prevention via research, innovation and establishing those all-important partnerships. Toine is currently the Program Manager of Sustainable Food Chains at Wageningen University Research in the Netherlands. He's coordinator of the European Union Food Waste Project, Refresh, and the Managing Director of the Foundation United Against Food Waste. He's also Director on the board of Fight Food Waste Limited, so understands not only the global perspective, but how Australia fits within that. Please welcome me in joining. So I've got Tanya's disease, sorry about that. Welcome Toine Timmermans to the stage, and isn't it great to hear somebody from overseas not buffering in real life? Here he is.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. There's so much light here, I can't see you, unfortunately, but I hope you can see me. It's great to be here. Thanks, Pip, for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to share in less than 10 minutes what's happening out in the world. So that's quite challenging to explain what's happening at the place where over 8 billion people minus 25 million live. So 10 minutes is impossible. So I'll go with the highlights and zoom into some specific areas that hopefully will be inspirational to you. I used some of the information that has been collected by the Champions 12.3 coalition coordinated by World Resources Institute, and that's a group of 40 global leaders progressing and engaged with SDG 12.3, so the target of halving food waste in the world. And Fight Food Waste is one of the friends of the Champions group, so we're very well involved in this program. Just in September, they published a new annual report on showing the progress, what is happening in the world, in countries, in businesses and other organizations in meeting the target of 50% reduction. This group works with a roadmap that is updated every 3 years and just being updated this year. Milestones for every 3 years. And the news is, being an optimist, there is positive development. But if you look at a little bit from a worrying side, it's like we are not making the progress needed to meet that target. But some countries, and I think that's the positive side, are showing and taking a leadership role in being the front runners in this field. And to be honest, Australia is definitely one of the countries in a good position to take and to further strengthen that leading role with only a couple of few other countries. And what is key, businesses are making more progress than countries in the world. To go a little bit more detailed on this, this shows also what is happening and probably some of the reasons why there is some more delay, and some countries are taking more action just on the food waste topic, on food systems topic. Of course, climate change is becoming more and more a topic. I'll get to that later. Of course, we see the still disturbance of the COVID-19 responses and the distraction on supply chains. Russian invasion is definitely having an impact on resources, resource prices, and on energy prices. And known in history, if you look back hundreds of years, it is always the time when resource prices go up. That is the perfect moment, especially for businesses, to take action on utilization of their resources better. So we are perfectly in time in this stage to take that forward role and getting more momentum on reducing food waste. On the slide, you see an overview of those countries that have set up some kind of public-private collaborative model to work collaboratively on meeting this SDG target. You see, there are some countries, but it is still limited. Looking at the model that's been applied in most of these countries, we call it the Target, Measure, Act model. Target, of course, align with the SDG or a more ambitious target. Measure, be sure that you identify how well you are doing as a business or as a country, and it helps you to identify the hotspots and identify the progress you make. And of course, it's all about the action for structural change. On the target side, you see that 80% currently of bigger companies in the world are aligned with this SDG target. So that's a good progress. But what is lacking is that not all of these companies, only 1 in 4, are engaging with their suppliers. And that's of course a key thing if you're addressing food waste. You need to do this in a farm-to-fork approach and not just look at your own operations. If you look at the measurement side, that's where most of the progress is made, especially by companies. The target in that roadmap was 40% of world's 50 largest companies would measure their progress, and that's in line with what's happening currently. And more are all working with the suppliers on the measurement side. So not so much on the target side yet, but on the measurement side, more and more companies are engaging with their suppliers. On the government side, you see they're lagging behind. Not only working on scale and setting up public-private programs, but also one of the targets was that hopefully 5 years after the setting of the SDGs, that first countries were online or already have met their ambition of halving food waste. That hasn't happened yet, and we are still far away from that to happen. What is exciting is that, at least I think that's exciting, is that in Europe now every country, so all EU 27 countries are obliged to report about their food waste levels. And just 3 weeks from now, all of the countries have submitted their first data. And this is the outcome of this. Maybe not that important what is the figure, but what is important that almost all 27 countries now in a yearly structure report to the European Commission based on structural information collection on how much food waste they have and what is happening in the different parts of the supply chain. There's still a lot of uncertainty in the data if you look at it, and understand that in this data it is food waste including the inedible part. That's why the level of food waste in households is still relatively high, but that is because it's including the non-edible parts of it, like the bones and the skin, if they're not eaten. So otherwise, the level of household would be around 35%. Looking at the volumes, it's comparable with the study we have done in 2015. So we're still looking about 88, 90 million tons of food waste happening in Europe at this stage. What's getting more on the agenda, of course, is the link, because we know reducing food waste is good to the economy, it's good for the social agenda, but it's also good for the environment. Climate change, biodiversity loss are the driving themes now at the moment. We know, based on science, that about 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, if you look at the full cycle, are linked to our food system. We know that if you look at solutions to mitigate climate change and to also look at how can we reduce the emissions and keep within 1.5 degrees, what is challenging as we've seen in the COP, is that there's two big solutions linked to the food system. More plant-based diets and reducing food waste. Only reducing food waste is estimated to contribute to 100 gigatons of greenhouse gas CO2 equivalent reductions. So it's a massive part of the solution that we need to grasp and is at hand now. We just have finished the COP negotiations, and people are sometimes very worried or sometimes hopeful about the outcomes. What I think is an important element that the food system has been for the first time really seriously on the agenda. And several organizations have made new commitments and pledges focusing on how food waste and food system change can add and help to meet all the climate change and climate ambitions that we have. And I think one of the most interesting pledges is made by the Dutch government, and the Dutch government is promoting that 50% reduction should be the target for all European Union members, and it should be farm to fork, so including the primary sector. Just yesterday, the first results have been shown of what is the status of member states in Europe about, because there is a consultation, there will be negotiations starting next year, will there be compulsory targets from the European Commission to member states about the level of food waste? And these results are not hopeful. There's only a very few countries, and Netherlands is 1 out of 4 small countries that say, yes, we need this compulsory targets, 50% reduction, commit to SDG 12.3, farm to fork. But there's also a couple of countries that say, we don't want any movement and response from the European Commission in this area. and many of them are neutral. So we have still a lot of work to do in Europe. So Europe is definitely and was definitely leading, but now it comes up to serious leadership and progress in this area. So next year will be an exciting year for Europe. I think what is important, I already mentioned, and that's what I know best, is that some countries in Europe are leading the way, and Netherlands is one of those. And we base our structural and systemic approach on the 4 pillars, also as Jan mentioned, is on being sure that you have your measurement in place, commitment of the businesses working on innovations and actions across the full supply chain, a really structural consumer activation campaign, and what we call a policy program to change the rules of the games to make it possible for all organizations to contribute with innovations that fit the circular economy. What is important in that is the measurement. We are one of the first countries in the world where all retailers report to us and we publish a public benchmark. That's probably the most exciting thing we did, because that's when, at the time when retailers start competing on how can we scale up the best innovations that will help us to meet the target. So we can say that Dutch retailers are now on their way to meet the target of 50% reduction, because of having a benchmark, because it's competitive, and because they are now scaling solutions and not only talking about and communication about it. But that also drives change, because it makes clear that, for example, in those areas where no interaction or no innovation has been taken yet, for example, the bread, that means that there's a response from the industrial baker sector now. They've also done their measurement, they're working on intervention. So it will scale towards further solutions. What's also important in innovation, some bigger companies are using their skill for impact. So on the right side you see an example, there are hundreds, but this is the example of Unilever. Unilever, a company that you probably also know of. In just 2 years, they have managed to get rid of all their obsoletes. That means no food waste to landfill, that's not allowed. First thing you should do on the policy side, I think, to abandon that, but no food waste to feed anymore. So everything is going to human consumption because they changed internally the way they look at obsoletes. And I think that is something, as a waste warrior approach, that could be multiplied all over the world. Consumers are showing most probably the most driving in the Netherlands. We see about 30% reduction based on a structural long-term campaign with all types of interventions and direct engagement of consumers, involving over 150 partners, contributing to making the change positive for consumers, working on the positive social norm. So it's working, but we need more. And now we're getting to the stage that we get consumers more being helped by the factories, by the retailers, on helping them to reduce food waste further. And I think the most relevant part, also for discussion hopefully today, is look at the policy side. So how can we make the legislative framework fit for purpose? And that's what I think is the next step that's needed. And there again, also companies are leading the way. So our largest retailers just announced last week that they will increase their target, and that means that they will focus on reduction of scope 3 emissions from 15 to 45%, meaning they will take responsibility for everything what is happening in producing the product and the full life cycle. And I think that is a very strong statement that should be followed clearly, but also should be an encouragement to look at how can we in full supply chain address these topics. As said again, and then I finalize, there are a few countries leading the way. And Australia is in a perfect position, working on the 4 connected pillars to address all these challenges, working together to meet the target of halving food waste in your countries. Thank you for your attention.